Welcome to today's episode of Insights with Us. I'm Anastasia, a licensed professional counselor, owner of Happy Mind Wellness Company, a Colorado-based therapy practice, and creator of this podcast. My goal in this podcast is to help you learn more about yourself. Growth happens when we get uncomfortable, which happens when we sit with new ideas, which we haven't sat with before. I hope that we can work on this journey of personal growth and understanding together. As a disclaimer, there may be swearing in this podcast, but sometimes we get caught up in the human experience. It happens. And also, sometimes we can talk about difficult or activating topics. So maybe put on some headphones if you need to, and remember that support exists for you if you want it. I am getting real with you all today. I am going to talk about parts work and what I've discovered about myself so far in doing this work. Parts work, or sometimes known as internal family systems, is a great way to do internal work, and what's wild about it is that it is creative and imaginative and often makes zero logical sense. So let go of the logic today. Let's dive in and see if we can build some insight. A great resource for parts work is Richard Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts. And in this book, he writes that many cultures view our internal experience from the viewpoint of a multi-mind, instead of a more Western idea of a mono-mind. Sadie and I talk about this in our last episode, the idea that if the mono-mind was correct, that means anything you experience is true because it is 100% all of you. But sometimes we do things that don't make sense, aren't true, or are a reaction to a past pattern instead of how we want to be reacting in the present. If we can slow down and begin to view our internal experience from this multi-mind perspective, then we can see our reactions and automatic thoughts from a place of curiosity. We can ask questions like, where is this reaction coming from? Which part of me is showing up right now? And how are they trying to protect me? This is a very key question that I ask myself all the time, which we'll get into. In order to find this curiosity, we need to break free from the mono-mind and allow for creativity to exist. Because again, doing this work is not necessarily logical, but it can be incredibly important and powerful. When I first started to do this work, I started by identifying patterns within my reactions. I tried to notice when I was having an anxious spiral, and if I could during, but especially after the fact, I would pause and ask myself, what did this pattern look like? What led to the spiral? What kind of spiral was it? Did I shut down? Did I get activated? Did I move so quickly I couldn't slow down? What was going on inside of me? And if I was interacting with somebody and I didn't really react the way I would have liked to with somebody that I care about, I would ask questions like, what was it about that reaction that I struggled with? What was happening within me that led to that reaction, rather than what the other person did or what I think about them in that moment? I don't want to focus my attention on others and what they could be doing differently, because even though sometimes it's a lot easier to come up with those answers, we don't have power over what others do. So even if someone did something that upset me, I can build curiosity around what makes them tick, but I can only change and work on my own experience. So for now, I'm just going to focus on my own internal experience and what's happening with me. Once I start to recognize a pattern that occurs, like those anxiety spirals, I start to notice the mindset that I am in within that pattern. So again, am I just anxious? Am I anxious and frustrated? Anxious and tired? Anxious and sad? Am I shut down? Am I defensive? Am I angry? And then once I start to notice the pattern and my mindset within those patterns, that's when I start bringing in this idea of parts work and the multi-mind. Because it is not my whole self that is anxious or defensive. It is just a part of me that is having big feelings and potentially taking over and reacting for me. But what I want is I want to be able to identify that part of me without it taking over how it responds. I want my wisest self to be in charge. The imagery that I like to describe for this interaction within myself is to imagine that I'm driving a bus, and each part of me gets a seat on the bus. Now, let's say I notice a part of me is feeling extremely anxious and wants to run away, shut down, and cry. If I was trying to push down and ignore these feelings, it's like I'm trying to take that anxious part of me and kick her off the bus. But this anxious part of me is there for a reason. She is trying to help me with something. So me trying to kick her off the bus is just going to upset her more and make her fight harder to stay on the bus and be heard. She will not leave the bus, and me trying to make her will make my feelings worse. Instead, I want to make sure that my anxious part knows that she is welcome to a seat on the bus. I'm not going to kick her out, but I also don't want her to push me out of the driver's seat. What I try to do, and full disclosure, it doesn't always work, is invite this anxious part of me to sit in the seat right behind me and let me know what she's anxious about. I want to hear what these parts of me are trying to tell me so that I can have all the information and make an informed decision. And again, I want to do this with every single part of me. I don't want to just listen to my anxious part. I also want to listen to the part of me that is dreaming and hoping big. I want to listen to my angry parts, the parts of me that want to shut down and dissociate, my protectors, my organizers, my really vulnerable parts that are probably started protecting me when they were a child and didn't know any different. And again, it might not make logical sense what I'm saying, but we put logic to the side for this episode, and we are getting creative with how our body interacts with itself. So, once I've understood the pattern, which again can take a while and sometimes it might be quicker, I notice that it's easier the more I've done it, I can then identify what this part of me is reacting to, what its reaction is, and then I start getting extra creative. I like to sit with that part of me that's showing up and see what it looks like. Not from a place of logic, but from a place of imagination and curiosity. These parts of us can look like anything. Another version of us, something from nature, a figure from a movie or a book, or even an object. The goal is not to force these parts of us into a logical form, but rather to lean into the imaginary, to help you create distance from this part and build a relationship with it. So again, I'm going to repeat, this is not from a place of logic, but from a place of imagination and curiosity. And it works because it's weird and different, and our brains just love leaning into it. In internal family systems, this is called unblending. In EMDR, it's called building a window of tolerance. In ACT, it's called diffusion, or rather not being fused to it anymore. Whatever language clicks for you, the idea is you are trying to create space so that you can increase your curiosity. Now that you've heard what it means to notice and name the different parts of you, I'm going to get a little vulnerable with you all and share the parts of me that I've identified so far. I am not going to go into explicit detail about the situations that trigger the different parts of me, but instead talk about the overall themes that I've noticed. I want to give you just enough to help you understand how these parts of me show up in my life, how they might try to take over, sometimes they do take over, and how I try to diffuse, unblend, build a relationship with, and work with them towards the common goal of surviving the human experience. I've mentioned in the past that I have anxiety. I know, shocker, I only mention it like every episode. And I most definitely am a perfectionist. That is one of my challenges. And for the longest time, I would try to kick my anxiety off the bus. And I noticed that whenever I'm starting to feel anxious, I would have a stronger need to be perfect, have everything in control. But this also made me sick for a long time, trying to be on top of everything, all of the time. So then I started to try to kick that part off the bus too. I didn't want to be anxious. I didn't want to control everything to make the anxiety go away. I just wanted to feel normal. Now, as I sat with this perfectionist part of me, I started to see her as my high school self, but dressed as a college professor. She's got the messy bun going on, the nice pants, a sweater, was always carrying an organizer just in case something needs to get scheduled. She is ready to coordinate and plan and take care of every little thing. When she shows up, I use it as a sign that I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, and she wants to fix everything for me before I shut down. But also notice that means I haven't shut down yet. So if I notice this part showing up, I check in with myself, notice how I'm feeling, what is causing my perfectionist to show up, and what she needs to feel heard. Usually it's just her asking me to write everything down in my calendar or double check to make sure that I'm not overextending myself. And once I've done that, she gets quieter. She feels pretty content to just chill on the back of the bus. Now, today, when I notice my perfectionist is itching to drive, I slow down. I see what she needs before she takes over. Usually, it gives me a chance to take a breath and process what's happening. Notice what is within my control and what isn't. And usually, this perfectionist part of me shows up to protect the child part of me that gets completely overwhelmed and shuts down when there is too much piled onto me at once. Instead of fighting against my perfectionist, I listen to her, work with her, and ideally stop fighting with her so that we can both protect the parts of me that are scared. But if I do ignore her and overextend myself, if I take on too much or agree to too many social outings, if too many people are telling me what to do when, too many other voices in my head, that is when my child self takes over and she shuts down hard. It's done. I am out, at least for the rest of the week, maybe even the rest of the month, if I have overextended myself too much. All she wants to do is sleep all day, hide in the closet from friends and family, and not come out until she feels better. I picture her as my middle school self. When I started participating in competitive sports, my homework increased, and I started to realize what it meant to take on responsibility. And while being in middle school, you don't have that much responsibility compared to what I take on now. But because of my anxiety, my brain was able to jump ahead to what this meant for high school, college, adulthood, and I felt woefully unprepared and completely overwhelmed. This child part of me takes over when it's too much and I've pushed myself too hard. And she also shows up when I am feeling unheard. I have a big, loud family whom I love. And usually in this family, whoever is loudest is heard. And I'm pretty quiet. That's why one-on-one or talking into a microphone is best for me, because I tend to stop talking if there's too many people around. I have gotten better at speaking up over the years, but I have spent more family dinners than I can count quietly sitting by myself, wondering if anyone would notice. I even remember keeping track of time once, and it took 3 days for someone in my family to realize I hadn't spoken. Now, these memories are strong for me, but I honestly doubt anyone in my family remembers any of them because they were all in their own heads, dealing with the parts of themselves that needed attention. I do not blame or hold resentment towards anyone because, as I said in an earlier episode, I know my family loves me and they did the best they could loving me. We are all human and we have our own shit we're dealing with. And while some parts of me might have felt, unheard or ignored or hurt, that doesn't mean my family was intentionally trying to hurt me. This is my experience versus theirs, and both can be right. So, even though there's all those extra layers in there, this is where this part of me was born. If I did want to say something and I got talked over or interrupted or ignored, my child part would come out and tell me to run away, hide, stop trying. What's the point? It's not like they're going to hear you anyway, right? And while I can understand this knee-jerk reaction from a child and why she thought it would be helpful, she didn't have the emotional intelligence to understand all the other dynamics going on. If me now, as a working professional, was in a meeting and being talked over, because I'm a woman and this happens, me shutting down or crying in the middle of the meeting is the last thing that I want. So what do? Well, ideally, instead of crying, I would take a moment to internally talk to my child part, maybe even take a break from the meeting, or just quietly breathe to myself. I let her know that it makes sense why she is overwhelmed. It can be a lot to feel unheard or pushed in a whole bunch of different directions. And these situations probably are very scary to any child. I give her permission to go and hide in a closet in my mind. Again, creativity, not logic. And I even send my old dog Maz to go sit with her, to let her know that she isn't alone and she does not have to handle the scary thing because me, my adult self, as I am now, can do it for her. It's not her job, it's mine. Then I walk away and I let her hide in the closet. And I actually go and handle the scary thing. This is how I got through grad school, becoming a professional at my first job, quitting community mental health to start my own private practice, anytime I have to have hard conversations, or even starting this podcast where I decided that I'm going to start opening up about my fears and vulnerabilities. When before I started to record these conversations, I could count on one hand the people I was willing to actively open up to about all of this. My child part goes and hides in the closet every time I hit the record button because this is something I'm excited to do. And I know that it's only going to make me stronger. The fact that I'm having this conversation with all of you right now, that I'm sharing these parts of me, I would never have done this before. And yet here I am, showing all of you what it means to build curiosity. I'm so proud of myself, and I'm so proud that I'm not shut down right now. That's only ever amazing. Now on the flip side, if I do catch myself hiding or crying, it is a cue that my child self took over before I had a chance to check in. That she needed to feel safe, and I missed it. When this happens, I just sit with her, and I help myself feel safe until I, as the adult version of me, can continue with what needs to get done. I do not force myself to do it before I'm ready. I find safety first, usually by giving myself permission to isolate or shut down a little bit before I continue. Now, these two parts I just talked about, my perfectionism and my child part, I've been working with them for a long time. I have noticed them and talked to them and worked to help them feel safe and heard for many, many years. But there are two parts that I've had to deal with more recently that I'm still working on building a relationship with. I do not have as great of a handle on communicating with them, and typically they still take over before I have a chance to notice them. I end up having to make repair attempts and do work with the people in my life after the fact because I didn't react the way I wanted to. But for the purposes of being vulnerable and getting a little uncomfortable, today I want to share what I can. Just know that I don't have all the answers. And as you do this work with yourself, I don't expect you to have all the answers either. The first part that I'm going to talk about next, I still laugh about how it presented itself to me. So before I tell you what I've named this vulnerable part, I want to give you some information. Basically, I was feeling pulled in a lot of different directions. Everyone in my life had a different idea about what choice I should make and what was right for me. And as someone who is an empath, I can pretty easily pick up on other people's reactions, feelings, energies. So if someone doesn't agree with what I'm doing, I notice it pretty quick, even if they're trying to be supportive. And then, because I also have this caregiver part of me, which we're not going to go into too much detail today, for the longest time, I would take that discomfort as a sign that I was making the wrong choice and I needed to do what the other person wanted for me, even if it's not what I wanted for myself. This has led to some pretty unhealthy patterns in past romantic and platonic relationships, where I ended up feeling unheard, pulled in directions that didn't work for me, and often left me miserable. So, I was feeling this way again recently, and I noticed a part of me was feeling angry, irritable, and extremely defensive. It was ready to fight everybody in my life, which I am not that much of a fighter, so the fact that I was getting angry and irritable was a sign that something was up. I had never really created separation from this part before, not in this way, and I noticed that I was in a space where I could invite curiosity into this interaction. So I chose to sit down and meditate to try to discover who was showing up in those feelings. And this part of me, the part that felt pushed and pulled and judged for not doing what others felt was right, presented itself to me as a feral cat. A feral cat hiding in a box in an alley, and everyone was trying to reach in and grab them, but they didn't feel safe, and they were worried that those hands were trying to hurt them, so they just kept swatting and scratching the hands away, refusing help because it didn't feel safe. Remember when I said that parts work is not always logical? Now, ideally, those in my life that had an idea of what I needed could also pause and listen to what I believe I needed and work to support me in my journey instead of telling me what I need to do. And sometimes the people in my life can do that. And again, sometimes their own parts get in the way and they can't react to me the way that I need because they're too busy reacting in their own way. So I didn't feel heard. And my feral cat, who I have lovingly adopted by now, just to let you know, my feral cat needed to push everyone away to feel safe. And I can understand why they needed to do this. But it's not a great feeling to have that I can't let anyone in. And I really do not like the reaction of needing to push everyone away. Which brings me to another part that I've had to get to know recently, my hyper-independent part. She doesn't really have an image yet, but I'm pretty sure her and my feral cat part work together to protect me. She shows up to protect me when my vulnerable parts feel unsafe, whenever I feel like a burden, like a failure, or like I'm going to be judged for needing something. She made a strong appearance recently when I pulled a muscle in my back and could barely move. My partner and my brother had to drop everything that they were doing to help me. My brother even lovingly, I'm so appreciative towards him now, had to call out from work because I couldn't take care of my dog Juliet. I couldn't stand up to get myself food. I couldn't even put myself to bed without help. I spent hours in my mind figuring out what I needed to bring within reach so that I only had to move the one time to gather what I needed, and then I wouldn't have to move the rest of the night. But instead, my brother decided to call out so that he could stick around and help me. He made that first day when I could barely move bearable. And he even took care of Juliet the second day before going to work. He spent that week driving me around, cooking for us both, cleaning, making sure that even though I could move a little bit more, I didn't push myself more than I needed to. My hyper-independent part was struggling so hard the whole time because this part was telling me I was supposed to be able to take care of it alone. I'm not supposed to need help, and needing support is a sign of weakness. But this isn't true, and I know this isn't true. We are actually stronger together. And being able to be vulnerable, ask for help, or take help that is offered, even if you don't technically need it, but it could make your life a hell of a lot easier, could be a game changer. Imagine if you didn't actually need help, but you were able to ask for it, and the people in your life that were able to help you were willing to do it. And vice versa. We could all support each other. The goal, and what I have spent the last several years working on, is saying yes to help if it is offered, especially if it would make a lot of difference in my life and not affect theirs as much. If something feels too big, I'll say no. But maybe offer a smaller alternative that I am willing to accept. Or even tell the other person that I'm hesitant to say no because it doesn't feel like something I can accept. And usually I'm met with, well, that's ridiculous. I love you. You're a part of my life. Let me help you. Which is honestly exactly what I say whenever I offer help or support someone in my life and they're struggling to accept it. Just like with my brother. I told him hey, I'm sorry, I'm feeling a little bit like a burden. There's this part of me that tells me I'm supposed to be independent and doing this on my own. And he just laughed at me, called in to work, and helped me anyways. And again, I feel so much gratitude for that. My partner too, he had all these plans and he canceled them and gave me a massage so that I could physically move the next day. So much gratitude. And if I had let that independent part of me drive the bus, I would have turned all that help away. And who knows how long it would have taken me to recover because I would have pushed myself too hard trying to get through it all. All of this work that we have spent the last 14 episodes of this podcast talking about, it's all about starting small, allowing it to build. We start by noticing what we want to change, being able to identify it in the moment, letting ourselves be vulnerable in small ways so that it can get bigger, asking for help when we can, getting to know the parts of us that react and get in the way, and how to help them not be in the way, but instead feel safe, heard, validated, and let them help us. This episode today was a small snapshot into the inner work that I've been doing. And my goal in sharing was 1, to show myself that I can be more open about this kind of thing, and 2, to help you find a new way to interact and work within yourself. If you have a pattern that you keep repeating, a reaction that you don't like having, or a part of yourself that you don't like, try to invite curiosity in and notice what this part is trying to protect you from, what it's helping you with, and what it needs to feel safe. It might be trying to control everything for you so you feel better. It might be trying to hide weakness so that you can be accepted. It might just be completely freaking out and overwhelmed and need permission to go hide somewhere for a minute. But hopefully, something we talked about today resonated with you. If it did, let yourself sit with that idea for a little while longer. And if you have any questions for this podcast or any themes you'd like us to focus on in the future, send us a message on Instagram at insightswithuspodcast or send us an email at insightswithus@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please follow, like, or subscribe. If you want to support this continuation of the podcast, you can donate too. To do so, visit my website and donate on Podbean's Patreon program, or find Insights with Us on buymeacoffee.com. I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you're listening. Thank you for creating insight with us.